Good afternoon. My name is David Stomps. I'm with the California Energy Commission, and I'm going to be speaking on the energy sector. California's economy and the quality of life of all its residents really depends to a large extent on the abundance and reliability of energy services. And I think I can safely say that the energy sector intersects pretty much with every other sector that you're going to hear about today in one way or another. It's a complicated or complex, large integrated system, both electricity, natural gas, transportation fuels, that ranges from the production of energy to the transmission, distribution, and then the end use, and then all the management to make it all happen and come together and have things, energy when you need it. So it's a very large, complicated energy system. And usually we think about, or I think most people think about energy as sort of the source of the emissions that lead to the climate change that we're concerned about. So the flip side is that the energy sector has some vulnerabilities to climate change itself. And so I'm going to talk about some of those today. And then I'll also talk a little bit about some of the steps that have been taken so far, just highlighting a few of those of what kind of things have been done to kind of lower that vulnerability. I don't intend to walk through every box of this diagram, but the sort of the high-level point of the diagram for today is just to kind of give a flavor of how climate change can affect so many different parts of the energy system. Across the bottom, and I don't imagine you can even see that, are the kind of the endpoints that could be affected. Everything from reduced generation of power plants during higher temperatures, lower efficiency of the transmission system during higher temperatures, potential outages during peak periods, and so forth, all during a time when there's a greater demand, primarily driven by air conditioning needs during those sort of peak extreme weather events. The second row up then kind of shows the sort of across-the-board impacts on the system, the energy system itself, from the transmission on the right, cooling of thermal power plants, hydropower, and then storage and refineries. And then the level above that gets at the kind of it's not just high temperatures, there's also increased risk of wildfires, the reduced snowpack and the effect of that on hydropower, the coastal flooding and inundation that we've just been hearing about in the previous couple of talks. So it's kind of ubiquitous in a sense across the energy system. It's not just, higher temperatures, we're going to have more air conditioning, and therefore we need more power plants. It's much more complex of a story. But sort of a key point I want to make throughout the talk is that's sort of in reference to the system that we have today, but the system's evolving rapidly, both to make it more reliable, but also, as Secretary Laird said, to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. The state's very aggressive at doing that. So the system is being changed for those purposes, and so it gives an opportunity to also make it more resilient and less vulnerable to climate change risks. As Ann mentioned at the very beginning, there was the third climate assessment for California was released in 2012. One of the 30-plus reports was specifically about the risks to the energy infrastructure from climate change, and I'll just show a few samples of the many, many aspects that study covered. One, as I mentioned, is wildfire risk to transmission lines. The little set of maps on the left-hand side of the slide shows for a couple of different climate or emission scenarios, greenhouse gas emission scenarios and different climate models, the relative level of increased risk of wildfire on major transmission lines. I guess one of the main points being that there's some transmission lines that were projected to have like a 40% increased risk of wildfire in the location where the transmission lines are, and particularly up in the northern part of the state that connects us to the hydropower from the northwest that we rely on during the summer period. The slide on there, the map on the right, gets to the point that a couple of people have mentioned about the coastal flooding inundation for power plants. The study identified 25 power plants that at least were vulnerable to some level of coastal flooding and inundation. They also identified 86 substations that could be affected. I mentioned a little while ago that one of the effects is the reduced cooling efficiency of thermal power plants, and therefore reduced generation during the hottest times when the peak demand is the greatest. So the little set of maps on the left just indicates the loss of efficiency on an average August period. The far left maps are showing what that looks like in kind of current conditions. Pardon me. So there's most of these effects or impacts that I'll talk about are things, as Secretary Laird also mentioned this morning, we sort of have a taste of those now. We do have, on hot days, power plants are less efficient in generation. So the middle slides, or middle maps of that figure, show the kind of the increase in those the increased loss of efficiency at higher temperatures and projected in the future. On the right-hand side, then, maybe is more what people probably typically think of from climate change impacts, and that's a projection of the increase in electricity demand for air conditioning in those hotter periods. This was from another study of the assessment that looked at kind of a zip code level of projecting what that electricity demand would be, and the darker reds being areas with the highest increase in demand. So what's being done? What are some of the? And I'll just give a few examples. There's many things. One of those, and it's been mentioned a couple of times today already, is the CalAdapt website. In generating the climate scenario data for evaluating the risk to the energy sector, the data, the climate scenario data themselves were actually, very valuable for many other purposes. So it's been put on a website developed at UC Berkeley that both helps communicate the risk to individual citizens that want to see what the future might hold for their community, but also the data are available for local governments so that they can do their own planning. Kind of what Dave Michel mentioned here a little while ago, giving them some at least data, and there's links to other resources. Also mentioned another one, CalLeap is another tool that Dave was responsible for getting developed that helps local governments in their regular planning process to incorporate energy assurance for all kinds of hazards, including climate change. Climate change then, or the information has also been useful in energy planning. For instance, in California, as far as we know, is the first agency or state to consider climate change in its energy demand forecasts. And another area very strongly supported is in energy efficiency and demand response. So energy efficiency is great for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it also then, sort of a side benefit, if you will, of that is that it also then can reduce peak demand during those times when the system's most vulnerable, during those sort of extreme weather events. Demand response is another one that California has done a lot of work in, which a set of actions then to help reduce demand on the system, the energy system, and developing tools including an automated demand response where it can interact with the user's home to reduce energy at the level that pre-agreed with the customer. Another sort of general area is to diversify the energy supply, so it's not, as I mentioned, the possible risk from reduced snowpacks on the hydropower system, rather than relying just on that, if more diversity of energy sources. So there's been a big push, as you know, for increasing the amount of renewable energy in the state. Several state and federal agencies are working on the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan to sort of expedite permitting of new renewable energy plants in the desert in places that then don't conflict with or minimize the conflict with endangered species and very fragile desert communities. And I should mention that that planning process is also taking climate change effects on species into account. Let's see, the governor also has very strongly been pushing for more distributed generation as a more kind of nimble, smaller size generation of power. Let's see, and then a lot of work on both technology and testing of microgrid systems that kind of can survive, can kind of break off and be independent if there's risks of the larger grid. The last area then is also support for energy-related research. So the climate change assessment on risks to the energy system, as I just was talking about, mostly focusing on electricity. We also have a study currently on vulnerability of the natural gas infrastructure. There's a lot of pipelines and storage facilities in the Delta, for instance, that might be vulnerable to sea level rise and levee failures. And then, not on the slide, but just as a very large array of technology research and development that's underway as well, largely sort of initially aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but they all seem to, they also reinforce the reducing the vulnerability of the system, as I've sort of mentioned here. So I guess just end on that point again of that as we redesign the energy system for to be more reliable and cleaner, lower carbon, it gives us a great opportunity also then to plan to be less vulnerable and more resilient in the face of climate change. And that's all I have. Yeah, question?
Leslie Ewing, California Coastal Commission. Totally non-coastal question, but from Sandy we saw that fuel delivery to gas stations was a big issue after those storms. Does that fall under energy? Does that fall under transportation? Where does that fall, and what are you going to be doing about fuel delivery?
It is, I guess, would fall in the way we've divided it, and came up this morning that the transportation and energy have split into two separate chapters from the original adaptation strategy. And did you want to respond to that? Okay, yeah, I didn't have an answer to the real part of your question, was what are we going to do about it? So.
Well, I can.
Or who?
Dave Michelle from the California Energy Commission. My program is California Energy Assurance Planning Program, and the Energy Commission is tasked by the governor if he declares an emergency to provide fuel to certain parties. Part of it, and it's called the California Fuel Set-Aside Program, and it is implemented through the Transportation Division of the Energy Commission. So there is a program for that, but the first step of it is it goes to the first responders. So, and it goes through OES, who's also here, and then you heard them through. So it goes through that system when there's any kinds of requests coming through to the local first responders. And Julie can correct me if I made any, Norris is sitting over here, but there is a program at the Energy Commission. We're also working on trying to enhance that program to provide secondary customers outside the first responders through any catastrophic emergencies. And there's also federal programs to deal with that as well through the Department of Energy and FEMA. So there's different ways to get fuels, but directly to gas stations, it's a much daunting task. So some of the recommendations that you see that came out of Sandy are similar recommendations that hopefully we are working on to address that same issues here.
And I'll also just jump in really quickly to add that we have split the energy and transportation discussions, but we're well aware that fuel and energy issues still touch the transportation sector, obviously, and our Safeguarding California plan will reflect some of those cross-cutting issues.
Steve Euler, a question about designing for graceful degradation down to the customer level. Systems that would back up the refrigeration systems, all the primary life support systems, you might say, in the house. These kind of systems could also actually show a pathway to where a grid is not involved in these devices in the first place, so we don't have to defend against that. Any notions on that, or fuels that would run those systems?
I guess we're not
akin to an uninterruptible power supply that would be charged locally. In Sandy, I heard somebody had $40,000 worth of solar panels, couldn't charge their cell phone because if the grid's not awake, you can't get any power out of those. So designing, instead of all eggs in one basket, break off and design for 300 or 400 watts that are available to the house anytime the panels are available.
And I'll just jump in here. So appreciate the comment, and it's definitely something that we know we need to think about and to have that input. Certainly Superstorm Sandy revealed a lot of vulnerabilities that I think nobody had ever thought about, or if they had thought about, hadn't taken perhaps enough to heart. Some of the things that I think you're referencing, like backup generators and basements that flooded and things like that, are areas that we know we need to think about and design for and develop policies around. So appreciate that input.
Thank you. Kathleen Ave from the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Great presentation, David, and thank you to the Resources Agency for undertaking this really important work. I'm so glad that I live in California. I wanted to comment, David, on the vulnerabilities that you identified, and SMUD recently undertook its first climate readiness strategy, and in that work we identified wind as a particular vulnerability for the energy sector, for us in particular, but really it's a statewide issue because for us in particular it's the Delta breeze. It affects our wind production at our Solano facility and would affect production for other utilities as well, but it also provides an incredibly powerful cooling force in the summer. And the Delta breeze, the impact area is felt through the Carquinez Strait, but up through, all the way down through the Central Valley, a very, very large region. And it is of statewide importance because There is evidence from scripts that on days when the Delta breeze is on, the temperature in LA is on average 1 degree cooler than it is on days when it's off. So that's far beyond the actual physical reach of the wind. It's an important and very complicated system with a big potential impact in the future that's really unknown. So I'm hoping that the state will include some discussion of wind in the adaptation work and then potentially some additional research. I'll also mention hydropower because it is our cheapest non-carbon source of energy, incredibly important as we continue to expand our renewable resources and electrify the transportation sector, and it is particularly vulnerable to precipitation, snowpack, runoff, and certainly I think we would love to see some careful treatment of hydropower and some discussion of the interaction with the federal government related to relicensing of those facilities to take into consideration climate change and preserve as much as we can of the generation benefit, balancing all the other ecosystem benefits that those systems provide: recreation, flood control, water supply, habitat, all those things. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the comments.
Yeah, I have a comment. Down in Nyland, California, a developer was going to build a cogeneration plant to burn solid waste from LA. He had trouble getting environmental permits, so he just picked up and went over to Mexicali, maybe 15 miles to the south. No environmental permits, built the cogeneration plant. You can see it from Nyland. That just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Now the solid waste from LA is going into Mexicali, being burnt. The power is coming back into LA. That just doesn't seem right to me. Can you comment on it?
Well, we're here to listen to your comments.
They shouldn't have been able to get away from the environmental permits by going across the border. I don't believe they should. And I don't know.
Can we expand the plan to include international relations as well?
I hear your comment, and it's certainly something that we're always concerned about variable standards. Certainly, I think crossing international borders is an extra level of complexity. Obviously, we have a federal background against which we have state standards, but then we also have international coordination. So I think that's a continuing challenge for our policy making across borders, and it's definitely a well-put comment, and it's something for us to continue to think about, so I appreciate that comment. And also, I don't think we caught your name.
Well, I'm Frank Metcalf. I'm retired.
Thank you for joining us.
Do you have time for another one?
Hi, Adam Smith, Southern California Edison. Sorry to ask so many questions. This is really interesting. Wondering about the gap. I know the CEC has funded a lot of great work that's gone on that's, talked about what the grid is going to need going forward in the case of these higher temperatures and the possible rise in peak demand. From what you've seen out of that work, do you think that the kind of, I guess you'd say, partial solutions or adaptive measures that you highlighted there, talking about increasing distributed generation, demand response, and that kind of stuff can meet the gap of the expected increase that we might be seeing due to climate change?
Guido, you want to try to tackle that one? This is my boss, Guido Franco, from the Energy Commission.
We believe that California will be able to have enough and reliable power as long as we plan in advance, and that's what we're doing. For example, the Integrated Energy Policy Report is considering climate change into the planning process. Like David said, one of the things that will help with the energy system is a system that is evolving really that rapidly. And actually, it's an opportunity for us, like the chairman of the Energy Commission has said, to develop a system that is also less vulnerable to climate change.
I guess I'd like to interject too, just to acknowledge that the utilities, a lot of what I've talked about as us included, I mean, the utilities are doing a lot of adaptation work and doing their own preparedness plans. And so I don't want to make it sound like it's just the state doing everything. Is that it? Okay.